along the sun-drenched shores of the eastern Mediterranean, where restless waves caress a rugged fringe of land pressed against steep mountains, a remarkable people carved out their destiny. These were the Phoenicians, an ancient Semitic group whose legacy would ripple across the known world, not through conquest or empire, but through their mastery of the sea and a boldness in trade that forever changed the course of history. Their homeland was not a vast kingdom, but a narrow ribbon of land squeezed between the blue expanse of the Mediterranean to the west and the formidable rise of the Lebanon mountains to the east. This coastal strip, now largely encompassed by modern Lebanon and parts of Syria, offered little in the way of broad, fertile fields. The soil, hemmed in by rocky elevations and crowded towns, provided only modest agricultural opportunities. The land's limitations would come to define the Phoenicians, shaping the very foundation of their society and pushing them relentlessly toward the open sea. Within this slender territory, the Phoenicians organized themselves into city-states, each an independent entity, often competitive, and at times outright rivals. Byblos, Sidon, Tyre, Arwad, and the city now known as Beirut were among the most prominent. These cities shared a common language and similar religious traditions, yet each maintained its own government, proud identity, and local customs. Rather than a single nation, the Phoenicians were a constellation of cities, loosely connected by culture and commerce but never united under a central authority. In contrast to the mighty, centralized empires that surrounded them, the Phoenicians' decentralized structure set them apart in the ancient world. What we call Phoenicia is, in fact, a name given by outsiders. The Greeks, encountering these seafaring traders, called their homeland Phoenicia, a term that would echo through the centuries. Among themselves, however, these people used the name Canaan, considering themselves Canaanites, heirs to a much older tradition that had flourished in the region long before the Greeks sailed its waters or the Romans marched its roads. Their roots reached deep into the Bronze Age. The culture of the Phoenicians did not emerge from sudden migration or foreign invasion, but rather developed directly from the earlier Canaanite populations that had lived along the Levantine coast for generations. When the sweeping upheavals of the Late Bronze Age, sometimes called the Bronze Age collapse, toppled many of the eastern Mediterranean's great powers, the people of this coastal region endured. Their cities did not fall into ruin, their traditions did not fade. Instead, the Canaanite heritage continued with little interruption, adapting and evolving into what we now know as Phoenician civilization. While ancient legends sometimes spoke of migrations from the distant Red or Erythraean Sea, modern research overwhelmingly supports local origins in the Levant, rooted in the ancient towns and traditions of Canaan. The environmental realities of their homeland had a profound impact on Phoenician life. With much of their territory given over to rocky slopes and hemmed in by the mountains, only narrow valleys and scattered patches of land could be cultivated. The limited farmland could support only a fraction of the population, and as the cities grew, the pressures mounted. Loss of agricultural land, whether to natural erosion, overuse, or the encroachment of neighboring territories, forced the people to look beyond their borders for sustenance and opportunity. The sea, always in view, beckoned as both a barrier and a promise. It was the highway to new markets, untapped resources, and distant allies. Thus, environmental constraint became the mother of invention, propelling the Phoenicians toward maritime enterprise. At the heart of each city-state stood a complex and hierarchical society. Kings and nobles presided over the affairs of state, wielding power that was both political and religious. Below them, priests conducted elaborate rituals, maintaining the favor of the gods and overseeing the sacred traditions that bound the community together. Merchants and craftsmen formed the backbone of urban life, their skills and ingenuity fueling the city's economy. Farmers, though fewer than in other ancient societies, tended the precious fields of grain, olives, and vines that clung to the hillsides. At the bottom of the social order were slaves, whose labor supported the households of the wealthy and the operations of the city. Yet, for all its stratification, Phoenician society was also deeply rooted in family and community. Kinship ties shaped daily life, and collective responsibility was central to both economic and religious activity. Religion permeated every corner of Phoenician society. Each city boasted its own pantheon of deities, with local gods and goddesses presiding over the fortunes of their people. Temples rose above the city streets, their altars thick with the scent of incense and the echoes of ancient prayers. Some religious practices, particularly those involving ritual sacrifice, were viewed by neighboring cultures with a mixture of fascination and horror. While the details of these rites remain partly obscured by time and the biases of outsiders, it is clear that religion was both a unifying force and a source of identity for each city-state, shaping calendars, governing festivals, and sanctifying the everyday rhythms of work and trade. The Phoenician language, belonging to the Semitic family, was another thread that tied the cities together. Their earliest writing systems evolved from the scripts used by their Canaanite ancestors and were influenced by contacts with Egypt. Over time, Phoenician scribes developed a streamlined alphabet, one that would later have profound influence on the languages and scripts of the wider Mediterranean. Yet in this early period, their writing was still in its formative stages, a tool for recording transactions, treaties, and sacred texts in the bustling life of the city. Archaeological evidence for these early Phoenician settlements is often tantalizingly out of reach. The ancient layers of Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre lie buried deep beneath the living cities that now occupy the same ground. As a result, direct study of their origins is challenging, with much of what is known pieced together from later records, inscriptions, and the occasional discovery unearthed by chance. Nevertheless, the persistence of tradition and the continuity of settlement speak compellingly of a people who survived the storms of history, adapting and thriving where many others faltered. Interaction with neighboring powers shaped the fortunes of the Phoenician cities from the very beginning. To the south, Egypt's influence was ever present, its pharaohs alternately trading with and exerting dominance over the coastal towns. To the north and east, the Hittites and, later, the rising Assyrian Empire cast their shadows, both threatening and enticing with the promise of commerce and protection. The Phoenician city-states navigated these complexities with characteristic pragmatism, aligning with powerful neighbors when necessary, but always maintaining their independence and distinctive character. Through trade, diplomacy, and the careful cultivation of alliances, they preserved their autonomy even as other, more centralized societies rose and fell around them. One of the most striking features of Phoenician society was the absence of a central government. Unlike the sprawling empires that sought to impose unity through force and bureaucracy, the Phoenicians remained steadfastly local in their loyalties. Each city-state was governed by its own king or council, making decisions for itself and pursuing its own interests. This political independence sometimes led to rivalry and conflict, but it also encouraged innovation and flexibility. Without the constraints of empire, the Phoenician cities could adapt quickly to changing circumstances, seizing new opportunities as they arose. It was within this context, a narrow land hemmed in by mountains and sea, a society shaped by ancient traditions and restless ambition, that the Phoenicians turned to the Mediterranean as their path to prosperity. With little land to farm and powerful neighbors on every side, they became expert sailors, learning to read the winds and currents, to build ships that could withstand the perils of open water, and to navigate by the stars. The sea was not just a source of food or a route for local trade, but an entire world of possibility. It offered access to timber from distant forests, metals from Anatolia and Cyprus, luxury goods from Egypt and Mesopotamia, and markets as far away as North Africa and southern Europe. Trade became the lifeblood of the Phoenician cities. Merchants carried timber, textiles, most famously, the vivid purple dye that became synonymous with their name glass, and crafted goods to every corner of the Mediterranean. In return, they brought back gold, silver, copper, tin, and the rarest luxuries of the age. The ships of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos became a common sight in the harbors of Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond, their crews bringing not only goods but stories, ideas, and the stirrings of cultural exchange. This emergence as pioneers of maritime commerce was no accident, nor was it the result of a sudden leap. It was the product of centuries of adaptation, a people learning to thrive in a land of limits, forging connections with their neighbors, and turning adversity into opportunity. The Phoenicians' origins on the Levantine coast set the stage for a civilization that would, in time, become a bridge between worlds, carrying the fruits of their labor and the seeds of their culture across the waters that once hemmed them in. Though many details of their earliest days remain hidden beneath layers of history, what endures is a sense of resilience and ingenuity. The Phoenicians, born of the land they called Canaan, shaped by mountains, sea, and the ever-present demands of survival, emerged as some of the greatest traders and sailors of the ancient world. Their story begins on this narrow strip of coast where necessity and ambition converged, and from these origins, the first great voyages would soon set sail. Imagine standing on a rocky promontory as the Mediterranean sun sets, casting gold across the waves. In the distance, sails unfurl and oars rise and fall, steady as a heartbeat. These are not just any ships, they are the pride of the Phoenicians, a people for whom the sea was both lifeline and legacy. Their mastery of the waters was no accident of geography, but a triumph of ingenuity, necessity, and relentless adaptation. Centuries ago, the Phoenicians embarked on a journey that would make them renowned for their dominance of Mediterranean trade. Their reputation for seafaring brilliance was not earned overnight. It was forged through hardship, environmental constraints, and constant pressure from rival powers. With limited land and encroaching neighbors, the Phoenicians turned adversity into opportunity. They looked out over the restless Mediterranean and saw not a barrier, but a highway, a network waiting to be woven. The marvels of Phoenician shipbuilding began with innovations both bold and subtle. Among their greatest contributions was the invention of the bireme. This vessel, with its 2 decks of oars, was a feat of maritime engineering. The lower bank of rowers, positioned just above the waterline, and the upper bank, set slightly higher, gave the ship greater speed and power. The bireme was more than a technical advancement. It was a symbol of Phoenician ambition, enabling their ships to outpace rivals and withstand the unpredictable moods of the sea. But speed alone could not guarantee success in the face of the Mediterranean's challenges. The Phoenicians pioneered a revolution in ship construction by developing the locked mortise and tenon joint, a technique now often called the Phoenician joint. In this method, carefully carved wooden tenons fit snugly into mortises, then locked in place, binding hull planks together with a strength and watertightness previously unknown. This innovation allowed Phoenician ships to endure long voyages, heavy cargoes, and the battering of open seas. Underwater archaeologists, peering into the silted silence of ancient shipwrecks, have found tangible proof of these advances. Remnants of cargo vessels and warships, some depicted centuries ago in Assyrian art, have emerged from the depths to confirm the stories told by old carvings and battered reliefs. Even after millennia, the precision of Phoenician craftsmanship is unmistakable. Mortise and tenon joints hold firm, the ghost of a whole sleek curve hinting at a time when these ships plied the waters from Cyprus to the Pillars of Hercules. The Phoenician fleet was not monolithic. It comprised a diversity of specialized vessels. Sturdy cargo ships sailed heavily laden with wares, timber, glass, textiles, and the famed purple dye, while leaner warships bristled with oars in the intent of defense or deterrence. The dual role of merchant and warrior was no accident. In a world where trade routes were often contested and piracy was never far from mind, the ability to protect one's cargo was as crucial as the ability to transport it. Yet even the finest ships would have been useless without the ability to navigate. Here, too, the Phoenicians distinguished themselves. Their skill in celestial navigation, reading the stars to chart their course, was renowned. It is widely accepted that they sailed by night, steering by the pole star, and by day, hugged the coast, reading the subtle cues of wind, current, and shoreline. This blend of open-sea daring and practical seamanship allowed them to venture further than most contemporaries dared imagine. The extent of their voyages remains a matter of scholarly debate, but evidence suggests Phoenician mariners did not see the Strait of Gibraltar as the end of their world. Instead, they passed through it, exploring and trading along the Atlantic coasts of North Africa and Iberia. Such journeys required not only courage but an intimate understanding of the sea's rhythms, how the currents shift, where the winds rise, and when to seek shelter in a hidden cove. To support their far-reaching ambitions, the Phoenicians transformed their harbors into marvels of engineering. Many of their ports, such as the one uncovered at Atlit, were not the simple beach landings of earlier ages, but carefully constructed, artificial harbors. They built breakwaters to calm the waves, quays for loading and unloading, and storage facilities to keep wares safe from storm and theft alike. The remains of these infrastructures, buried beneath centuries of silt or submerged by the rising sea, still bear witness to the scale and sophistication of Phoenician maritime enterprise. Their expertise in port development was as vital as their skills afloat. The harbors served as nodes in a sprawling network that stitched together distant shores: Cyprus, North Africa, the far reaches of Iberia, and the islands that dotted the Mediterranean. Each port became a marketplace, a crossroads where goods, people, and ideas mingled. The cities of the Phoenicians, once isolated along the Levantine coast, grew into the heart of a web that reached across continents. Trade was the thread that bound this network together, and the Phoenicians were its tireless weavers. Their ships became familiar sights in foreign harbors, their language a lingua franca among merchants. They carried not only their own products but also served as intermediaries, bringing the wares of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia to new markets. In return, they brought home gold, silver, copper, and other treasures, enriching their cities and fueling further innovation. This constant movement required more than technical prowess. It demanded adaptability and keen observation. The Phoenicians learned to read the moods of their trading partners as deftly as they read the sea. They adopted and improved upon the technologies and ideas of those they encountered. Their shipbuilding techniques, so effective and admired, did not remain secret. The Greeks and later the Romans studied Phoenician vessels, eager to replicate their success. When the Punic Wars broke out, Rome turned to Phoenician designs to build war fleets capable of challenging Carthage, the greatest of all Phoenician colonies. The legacy of Phoenician maritime achievement was not confined to a single era. Their innovations set a standard for centuries, shaping the way later civilizations approached the art and science of seafaring. The locked mortise and tenon joint, for example, would remain a hallmark of ship construction through the Classical Age. The bireme, with its double banks of oars, was copied and adapted by other powers, each seeking to match the speed and maneuverability that Phoenician galleys had first brought to the Mediterranean. What drove this relentless pursuit of mastery? The answer lies partly in the pressures that shaped Phoenician society from its earliest days. With arable land scarce and powerful neighbors ever watchful, the Phoenicians were pushed to seek their fortunes beyond the horizon. The sea was dangerous, but it offered the promise of survival and, for those with the skill to master it, the rewards of prosperity and influence. As their ships ranged further, the Phoenicians became the great connectors of their age. Through them, goods flowed from one end of the Mediterranean to the other, but so too did ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Their role as intermediaries was crucial in an era when direct contact between major civilizations was rare or fraught with danger. The Phoenicians, with their unmatched maritime prowess, became the silent brokers of the ancient world. Modern underwater archaeology continues to yield new insights into how they achieved these feats. Shipwrecks discovered off the coasts of Israel, Spain, and elsewhere have revealed not only the robustness of Phoenician ship design, but also the variety of cargoes they carried. Amphorae packed with wine or oil, ingots of copper or tin, and fragments of everyday life, all preserved on the seabed, testify to the scale and diversity of their trade. Yet for all their achievements, much about the Phoenicians remains elusive. Written records are scarce, and what survives often comes through the filter of other cultures, Greeks, Romans, and Assyrians, each with their own perspectives and agendas. The true voice of the Phoenician mariner, the thoughts of the shipwright shaping a new hull, or the calculations of the navigator plotting a course by the stars, are lost to us. What endures are the tangible traces, the remains of a ship, the stones of a key, the ripple of a name carried on the wind. In the end, the story of the Phoenicians is the story of the Mediterranean itself, a world shaped as much by movement as by place, by the ceaseless interplay of land and sea. Their ships crossed horizons that others feared, their ports welcomed strangers and goods from far-off lands, and their innovations echoed long after their own voices faded. Through their mastery of shipbuilding, navigation, and port development, the Phoenicians transformed the Mediterranean from a patchwork of isolated communities into a vibrant network of exchange. They were, in every sense, the masters of the Mediterranean, and their legacy endures in every sail that catches the wind, every harbor that opens its arms to the world. To imagine the Mediterranean in the first millennium before the Common Era is to picture a shifting tapestry of harbors, islands, and distant shores, all connected by the restless movement of ships and the ambitions of merchants. At the heart of this intricate web stood the Phoenicians. Their brightly painted vessels, laden with treasures, traced regular arcs from the Levant to the farthest reaches of the known world. Yet the story of Phoenician trade is not simply one of goods exchanged for silver or gold. It is the story of how commerce became a catalyst for cultural transformation, how ideas and alphabets traveled with cargoes, and how the legacy of a single seafaring people rippled through history long after their own voices had faded. The reach of Phoenician trade was astonishing. From their bustling cities on the Levantine coast, Phoenician merchants established far-flung networks that spanned the full breadth of the Mediterranean. Their routes extended to the islands of Sicily and Sardinia, the rocky outcrop of Malta, the sun-drenched Balearics, the mineral-rich lands of Iberia, and the arid stretches of North Africa. What began as seasonal trading ventures soon gave rise to permanent outposts, colonies that would, in time, become independent centers of commerce and power. Among these, Carthage rose to legendary prominence, but it was only the brightest among dozens of coastal settlements that bore the stamp of Phoenician ingenuity and adaptability. The lifeblood of this network was the constant movement of key commodities, each a precious thread in the tapestry of Mediterranean exchange. Foremost among these was cedar wood. Harvested from the forests of the Levant and renowned for its straight grain, rich scent, and resistance to rot, cedar was prized by builders from Egypt to Mesopotamia. It framed temples, palaces, and ships, its quality a silent testament to the forests from which it came. Alongside cedar traveled the fabled purple dye, a substance so costly and labor-intensive to produce that it became the preserve of kings and priests. Extracted drop by painstaking drop from the tiny murex snail, the dye yielded a color of such depth and brilliance that it signified royalty for centuries. The labor required, thousands of snails for a single garment, made Tyrian purple more valuable than gold by weight. Yet the Phoenicians were more than purveyors of luxury. They traded glassware, a craft they refined into translucent vessels and beads that captured the light. Their workshops produced textiles woven with skill and artistry, metals like copper smelted from Cypriot ore, and an array of crafted goods, ivory, jewelry, and carved wood that delighted distant buyers. The Mediterranean, once a barrier between distant peoples, became a conduit for goods that spoke of far-off lands and unfamiliar hands. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Phoenician commercial empire was their role as intermediaries, middlemen who connected civilizations that might otherwise have remained strangers. Their ships ferried Egyptian papyrus and Nubian gold to Greek and Etruscan ports. They brought Assyrian ivory and Babylonian cylinder seals to the markets of North Africa and beyond. In return, tin from the misty reaches of Britain, silver from Iberian mines, and spices from Arabia found their way eastward, reaching the courts of kings. This was a circuit not merely of commerce but of cultural exchange, in which the Phoenicians acted as silent bearers of news, customs, and inventions. The foundation of colonies was integral to the success of these networks. Colonies acted as stepping stones, waypoints for ships and safe havens for merchants. Among the earliest and most influential was Carthage, founded around 814 before the Common Era. The city's location, at the crossroads of east-west and north-south maritime routes, ensured its rapid rise. From Carthage, Phoenician influence radiated outward, giving rise to a new civilization that would be known as Punic. Carthage became not simply an outpost, but a rival to the old cities of the Levant, a center of wealth, learning, and political ambition in its own right. The colonial web extended far beyond Carthage. Phoenician communities flourished in Sicily and Sardinia, where they competed and mingled with Greeks, Etruscans, and indigenous peoples. On Malta and the Balearic Islands, traces of their language and religion blended with local traditions. Iberia, rich in metals, drew Phoenician traders deep inland, their influence stretching as far as the Atlantic coast. In North Africa, new settlements dotted the shoreline, each linked by familial ties and commercial interests to the mother cities of the Levant. These colonies, while retaining elements of Phoenician culture and language, often absorbed the customs of their new neighbors, creating hybrid societies that were at once familiar and profoundly new. The extent of Phoenician trade was not limited to the Mediterranean basin. Their networks reached northward to the tin mines of Britain, a vital source of bronze, and southward along land and sea routes that touched the edge of Arabia and, through intermediaries, possibly even the riches of India. Their ships braved the open sea, but they were equally adept at forging connections overland, moving alongside camel caravans through deserts or up the river valleys that threaded the ancient world. Out of this commercial dynamism arose one of the Phoenicians' most profound contributions to world history, the spread of the alphabet. Their writing system, born of necessity, was revolutionary in its simplicity. Where earlier systems required the memorization of hundreds of complex signs, the Phoenician alphabet pared language down to a set of easily learned symbols, each representing a sound. This made literacy more accessible, not just for scribes but for merchants, craftsmen, and sailors. As Phoenician traders established outposts and colonies, the alphabet traveled with them, inscribed on pottery, stone, and papyrus, finding eager adopters among the Greeks and, later, the Romans. The Greek alphabet, and through it the Latin and many modern scripts, trace their lineage to this Phoenician innovation. It is a legacy measured not in gold or cedar, but in the very words with which history is written. What is striking is that this transformation was not achieved by conquest or large-scale migration. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that the spread of Phoenician culture was primarily a matter of influence, not of people. Genetic studies indicate little direct Levantine contribution to the populations of the Western colonies. Instead, local peoples adopted Phoenician customs, language, and institutions through close contact and commercial exchange. The Phoenician identity, then, was less a matter of bloodlines and more a shared set of practices, beliefs, and innovations, a cultural coin that knit together the Mediterranean world. The effects of this cultural diffusion are visible in many aspects of ancient life. In art and craftsmanship, motifs and techniques traveled with goods, inspiring new forms in distant lands. In religion, the gods of the Phoenician pantheon, such as Melkart and Astarte, found new homes and identities in Greek and Roman cults. the institution of professional trade associations, seen in Greek cities, may reflect Phoenician models, where merchants and craftsmen formed guilds to protect their interests and regulate commerce. Even in the mundane details of measurement, weights, and accounting, echoes of Phoenician practice can be detected across the ancient Mediterranean. Carthage, as the greatest of the colonies, became the standard-bearer for this legacy. Its harbors bustled with traffic, its markets overflowed with goods from every corner of the known world. Carthage minted its own coinage, maintained its own fleets, and cultivated learning. Greek and Roman writers noted its libraries and written records, though only tantalizing fragments survive today. In the fields outside the city, agricultural treatises, once copied and admired by Roman authors, guided farmers in the cultivation of crops and the management of estates. Carthage was, in many ways, both a culmination and a transformation of the Phoenician world, blending inherited traditions with new realities. Yet the vibrancy of this web was not to last unchallenged. In time, the ambitions of Carthage brought it into conflict with a rising power, Rome. The Punic Wars, a series of titanic struggles, ended with Carthage's destruction and the eclipse of Phoenician political dominance. But while Rome razed Carthage and absorbed its territories, the influence of the Phoenicians did not vanish. Their language endured in pockets, their commercial practices shaped Roman trade, and their alphabet persisted as the foundation of Western literacy. Surviving literature from Phoenicia and the Punic world is heartbreakingly sparse. What remains are echoes, references in Greek and Roman texts to the libraries of Carthage, to chronicles and treatises now lost, to the careful records kept by generations of merchants. These absences are keenly felt, for they leave us dependent on outsiders' perspectives, sometimes admiring, sometimes suspicious. Ancient authors often portrayed the Phoenicians as cunning and shrewd, even deceitful, stereotypes that reflect both the admiration and the anxieties of their rivals. Yet all accounts agree on the centrality of the Phoenicians to the economic and cultural life of their era. Their greatest legacy is neither a monument nor a single artifact, but the enduring web of exchange and influence they wove. Through their trade, they helped create a Mediterranean koine, a shared cultural space in which goods, ideas, languages, and religions circulated freely. The alphabet they carried remains the basis for many scripts in use today. The commercial institutions they pioneered helped shape the economies of Greece, Rome, and beyond. Even after the fall of Carthage and the dispersal of their people, the world they helped create endured, visible in the very fabric of Western civilization. The story of the Phoenicians, then, is not one of vanished glory, but of transformation and continuity. Their ships may be lost to the depths, their cities buried beneath the sands or the sprawl of modern life, but the web they spun still binds together distant shores. It is a legacy written not just in the stones of ruined harbors, but in the words we speak, the letters we write, and the enduring idea that through trade and exchange, the world can be remade.